All right, so our next session is going to be incredibly powerful. We have a very special treat for the audience. So we have Penny Phillips. She is the president and co-founder of Journey Strategic Wealth. We have Mark Newfield, a financial advisor and managing director. And we have Chad Falconberry, a financial advisor and managing director at Journey Strategic Wealth. And I am pumped about this session. So we have an incredible panel. Penny will be leading the panel, and it's going to be all about how they learn and lessons learned and tax planning at their firm and practice management operations and how to help advisors really scale tax planning within their firms. So with that, Penny, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Laura. It is so nice to be here with you today. And what's really funny about this is that this is my first presentation back from maternity leave. I'm a first-time mom, and what a shock to the system to go from prepping bottles to prepping for a tax planning presentation. Here's my beautiful daughter. What does that have to do with tax planning? Absolutely nothing. But you guys just sat through 2 hours of talking about taxes, and I figured you needed a quick pick-me-up. So Mark, hold on advancing the slides for just 1 second. I want to introduce you and Chad. I'm excited to be sharing the stage with two incredible advisors and people from Journey Strategic Wealth, a RIA platform, a national RIA platform that I co-founded and now lead. Mark Newfield and his team joined Journey in 2022, opening our Richmond, Virginia office. This is actually a very special year. Mark is sunsetting, a really fancy and nice way to say Mark is retiring after many years.
Getting rid of me. It took them 3 years, but they're getting rid of me.
After many years of being an advisor, we're so lucky we got him here today to share his insights. Chad Falconberry joined us about a year ago from Charles Schwab, where he oversaw $750 million in client assets. We searched high and low for a successor for Mark Newfield's team. We are so lucky that we got Chad, and he joins another fabulous and super talented advisor, Angela Lesser, on that team, who's been with Mark for 15 years, as well as a director of planning. And we'll talk a little bit about the team in just a few minutes. Before I start my brief comments and then move to the panel, I just want to say that we'll talk a lot about best practices today as it relates to technology and tools and planning, but I want to point out a couple really special things about this team. I know so many of you probably on this presentation, and as some of you know, I've spent my entire career working with financial advisors, and there are a couple things that make this team special and advisors that are thriving today special. The first thing is an ability to evolve, adapt, and embrace change. This is a team that has transitioned their practice twice in the last, twice over the period of 2 years. They've integrated a new senior advisor into the practice 18 months before the founder advisor sunset. They've introduced new tools and technology like Holistoplan a couple years ago. And I want to point out that despite all of that change and evolution, they had their best year ever last year. And it tells us something about advisors that have the ability to evolve as the client's needs evolve and as the industry's evolved. And I think what's great about this team is never hanging on to a belief system or structure or process that is no longer serving them well. That's the first thing. The second thing I'll say is this is a team that focuses on what works and what is working now instead of what doesn't work. A lot of times when I'm having conversations with advisors about technology or processes or, you know, whatever tech of the day or tool of the day, there is a focus on what it can't do, what my firm won't allow me to do, what my firm doesn't have. And I think the advisors that are consistently successful above average have a keen ability to focus on leveraging the tools that they have today to tell powerful stories to clients about their services. The last thing I'll say is they do a great job, as do all our advisors at Journey, providing to clients information and things that they don't even know they're looking for. And I think Holistoplan and some of the tools within within the technology give you the ability to do that. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. Just a couple brief comments before I turn it over to the panel. the first thing is it's not a surprise. The industry has evolved, continues to evolve. Mark, we can take my gorgeous daughter off the screen now. Thank you. This isn't a surprise to anybody. I was talking about this with someone yesterday. Tax planning is to the industry today what financial planning was 10, 15 years ago. And, you know, I'm curious if others agree with that. We've had advisors moving from positioning a specific product to engaging in financial planning to now introducing specialized financial planning in their practices. And I do wonder where we're going. And I believe we're going to a more AI-driven, hyper-personalized planning experience. I am curious if folks agree with that or not. But the reality is tax planning is now, if it isn't already, it will be table stakes in our industry. If you look at the statistics, like financial planning a decade ago, most clients want financial tax planning when they're engaging with a financial professional. Next slide. Most clients are not receiving it. Now, this is juxtaposed against the fact that the adoption of tax planning tools in our industry has doubled over the last handful of years. Next slide. And folks are adopting it, but we found that even across all industries, most advisors are not actually using the tax planning tools or integrating tax planning into their practice, and we'll see that on the next slide. This is primarily in the broker dealer and captive space, but we're also seeing that in the RIA space. In my experience and anecdotally, what I'll say is there are three main reasons why advisors haven't fully adopted tax planning as the next service they're offering. Either they literally can't because their firm doesn't allow it, and we'll see that on the next slide. They don't because they don't have the knowledge set to do so, or they won't because, and this is a key for any practice management presentation, scaling while customizing, which is what all of you do every single day in trying to build your practice and engage in financial planning conversations with clients, is really, really hard. And so we'll talk through some best practices today and talk about how these folks have managed to do that and be super successful. What I'd ask you to take away, there's going to be a lot of insights. If you want the slides, happy to give them to you. I don't know how much we'll use them now that I'm not in control of them, but I will say I want you all to think about what I said at the beginning, because that really is the key, those three characteristics I talked about. If you can embrace and embody those, anything is possible, including leveraging holistic plans successfully in your practice. Okay, so next slide, it's our hold slide. I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed panel here. I want to first hit on that point about the industry evolving. And I want to talk about the last few decades. Mark, I'll start with you. You know, the senior advisor who's been around for many decades. Can you talk briefly about how your services to clients have evolved in the time that you've been an advisor? And then specifically, of course, we want to talk about how have you integrated tax planning into the practice? Was there a catalyst that really started that for you?
So obviously, well, great question. Before we go there, Laura, I want 40 of those 509 saved years. I want them back so I can go back a few years and start over again. If you would just send me a couple of those, I'm not asking for much, just 40 of the 509.
Absolutely, no problem.
Thank you. You're about to find out that I make fun of just about everything. You can always send me hand signals if you're unhappy with that. Tax planning, I would argue, has always been a part of our practice. I came out of the consulting world. I was the start of my professional career as a consultant with what is now called Accenture. So I had a consulting mindset, and I came into this business as somebody who intended to provide advice and not sell product. And of course, when I came in the business, it was mostly a product sales business, especially since I started with an insurance BD. But that's a whole nother conversation. But I would argue that I've always had tax planning as part of the business. Now, it helps that I have an accounting degree, but I've never been a CPA. It's just always been clear to me that it's important. And as somebody who before entering the business, because my income dropped precipitously, obviously, when I started a practice from scratch, I was a pretty high income person. And so I was very sensitive to tax anyway. And I just couldn't see how you were going to do good financial planning without thinking about the taxation component of whatever you do. So it's kind of always been part of the practice. It gets a lot easier with the tools we have these days.
Yeah. But talk about that, Mark, because the Holistic Plan's been out since 2019, I think. How was that introduced to clients, and what was that sort of experience like as a team saying, wow, we have this now, and sort of how do we use it?
Well, kind of on our standard meeting agenda, for our A+ clients, we've always had a kind of a 4-meeting rotation on an annual basis. Tax planning was always a bullet point on that agenda. But now, obviously, we have a tool by which, hey, send me your tax return. And the analytics are a lot easier than me personally, or Chad personally, or Angela personally reading a tax return and relying on our own skill set to understand what that tax return said and what it might mean. So, I mean, to Laura's point, we can much more efficiently, get a summary of the tax position, if only to understand the client's average tax rate. That alone is a useful piece of planning information to validate, for example, what eMoney is saying about the client's tax situation.
Yep. Yeah. And, Chad, what's interesting about you joining the team is you joined from a totally different environment and backdrop. And so I want you to talk about your experience immediately being able to expand your services and serve clients in new ways. What was that like for you? And then how did that sort of translate into the way you're serving clients now versus before?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so coming from Schwab's RIA, I was much, much more limited. The amount of tax planning that we were allowed to deliver on that platform was very close to zero, right? We could incorporate things like Roth conversions into our financial planning projections, but as far as getting into how does that impact and come in with all of the rest of your incomes, your capital gains, and that sort of thing, it was always defer to your CPA, right? Go and verify it, come back to me and let me know if my numbers are right. We couldn't be as much of a partner in the tax planning conversation as I know my clients wanted me to be able to be, and my team to be able to be, and that we wanted to be as well, because education is a massive part of what we do as an advisor. So I'll say, with being able to integrate this in, not only does it save us time as the advisor on the team that is doing the analysis and integrating into the financial plan, but when it comes to educating the client and being a thought partner with the client, to be able to put a report in front of that client that is much more digestible to the client to participate in that conversation, it was an instant value add for the clients that transitioned with me to Journey, that reached out to me once I left Schwab and joined this team a year ago, to be able to say, hey guys, there is a whole new world of conversation that is very impactful to the longevity of your financial plan, that we can open up and be a really good thought partner with you in that regard.
Such a great, and those are clients that, of course, you didn't solicit. They followed you here. So any Schwab folks on the call, don't worry about that. But what you're talking about, I think, is really important. Whether you are an advisor that is transitioning to a new part of the industry, or whether you're an advisor who's simply introducing a new service, I always tell folks, never be scared or embarrassed to reintroduce yourself to clients. And on the next slide, you'll see that I actually recommend that advisors do this on an ongoing basis. Reintroduce yourself and your services, revalidate your value proposition. I call it the end of your letter. You can send it wherever or whenever, but this gives you the ability because sometimes advisors say, well, where do I start? I have this great new tool. I want to do this consistently. How do I do that? The best way to do that is to hold yourself actually accountable to doing it by letting your clients know that you're about to do it. And so I have copies of these if anybody wants them, but we're excited to introduce a new service, or we're reflecting on all the success we've had the last couple of years. Here's some of the things that we've heard from clients that have gone really well for them this year. And it's a way to, you know, remind clients of what you do. And if they're not leveraging you for some of the services that they should be, it's a great way to sort of nudge them and show them that they should be doing that. So number one takeaway, get comfortable talking to clients and reintroducing what you do in your services. Folks, I want to talk a little bit about actually integrating tax planning into the client engagements. And let's start at the beginning. Let's start with client onboarding. Can you walk us through, and Mark, maybe we'll start with you. Talk us through the client onboarding process. So let's say the first year of someone becoming a client. Are you asking for tax returns up front? How are you using the Holistic Plan tools at the onset? And if you want to just go to the next slide, we can have a nice little backdrop there. Thank you.
Sure. And before we do that, there's a question in the Q&A in terms of what we're doing to maybe update eMoney on the tax assumptions. We use it more to validate, and we tend to find that they're not way off unless a client has some unique tax situation. And we're not really trying to do tax forecasting. I just want to make sure the cash flow is somewhere in the right arena. So if the like average tax rate is way off, we just kind of factor that into the conversation and say, hey, eMoney is way over or underestimating your taxes. Your cash flow probably looks more like this. And in the end, we're actually validating that with the client's actual spending. So I'm not that worried about precision. I'm trying to get into the right kind of confidence window. But back to what we're doing. We request, I think Chad can fill me in if I'm wrong, because I actually don't do the operational work here. But we request 2 years worth of tax returns on an initial client engagement. And generally, we won't actually proceed with running a full financial plan without getting the tax returns. So we're fairly rigorous about data collection. And then on an annual basis, we just get the most recent tax return when we're updating a client's plan. It's pretty straightforward. And it's in our standard data collection email that we send out upon onboard when we're onboarding a new client.
Chad, anything to add there?
Yeah, I was going to say, and the only thing that I'll add on an ongoing basis, we have workflows set up based on the client complexity and the client need, as well as the level of client service that we're providing. So the onus it isn't on our memory to each year go back and ask for, or which client are we asking for a tax return and which are we not. We've got workflows and dedicated systems set up in our CRM that will prompt us to go back and to have Melissa request that data.
Yeah, and we'll get to processes and systems in a second. Before I run through 3 slides with you, Mark, you said something when we were prepping for this. You said, I asked you to talk about, when is the right time to talk with clients about taxes? And you said all the time, certainly any time where there is any life event. Can you expand on that? I thought that was an important point.
Well, first of all, from a process perspective, with our best clients, we want to have a 2 times a year tax conversation, right? One towards the end of the year, as one at the beginning of the year, hopefully in the first quarter, when we can get a preview of what their tax situation looks like and do any tax forecasting that we want to do, or engage their CPA more likely in that process, depending on what we see. And then towards the end of the year, when we, October or so, when we have a real handle on the actuals to see if there are changes we want to make, or maybe there are gains or losses that we want to harvest, we might do either, right? Depending. But as far as the right time, I've never seen a client that wants to pay more taxes. Every single client I've ever talked to wants to, I'll call it optimize, but generally it means minimize their taxation. So it's always on their mind. I mean, if you've got, a client with any kind of high income level, which obviously is different for everybody, but I'll say anybody in our practice that's making over probably $250 a year wants to save on taxes however they can. And the right time to engage in that conversation is whenever you see something that might have an impact on their tax situation.
Yeah.
And if you don't see it, you have to ask the question. So basically every meeting we have, we're looking at cash flow and income and trying to figure out if there's a conversation to be had about some tax topic.
Yeah. Two best practices for and by the way, folks, if you want anything that you see here, I know Holistaplan's going to send it out. pphillips@journeysw.com. I'm happy to just quickly email you anything you need so you can get out those client letters. Two quick best practices. One exercise that's really useful for a team to do, and I recommend doing it this summer when things perhaps are a little bit slow, is kind of mapping out the client engagement process. And you'll see that on the next slide: client onboarding, client reviews, client service, right? Those are the main sort of points. And listing out all the ways in which you either enhance the client experience at those points, systematize something at those points, or integrate Holistaplan at those points. And Mark, if you can move to the next slide, I'll show exactly what I'm talking about. So client onboarding, right? Immediately sending out a client letter. And it's so funny because this is the lowest hanging fruit, literally the lowest hanging fruit. And so many advisors still struggle with this piece, with really setting proper expectations at onboarding. And by the way, proper expectations means the client knows that they're going to send you the tax returns every year. You explain that it's part of your process. The client knows that you're going to be meeting with their CPA, especially if they're an A client, every year. The client knows that you're going to be using tools like this. Just showing somebody what tax bracket they're in and a cool visual, I think, is awesome. And so taking time to map this out with your team this summer and then putting this into your CRM. We use Wealthbox and Holistaplan, super impactful. I'll go through two other points here on client reviews. Same with the client review. You should have an agenda that is tied to, this team does thematic review meetings, but review meeting agendas are set. They're sent out a week before the meeting. You're asking the client for feedback. What a lot of advisors want, and I want to address this, is more automation and AI, right? Like they're saying, okay, yes, I have the workflow and I can send the letter, but I want it to go out automatically. And what I say to advisors is, first of all, I think we're getting there as an industry, but you have a unique opportunity to customize and add in EQ elements to all of your communications with clients if they're not automatically going out. So what I suggest is have a template in a workflow. You use that template email every single time for a review meeting with the agenda, but you quickly customize it and it sounds like it's coming from you. Go to the next slide, Mark, for me, please. If you can.
I've advanced to 12. Are you not seeing that? Or you want me to go to 13?
Got it. Perfect. 12, and then I'll ask you to go to 13. One tax review meeting a year. Folks, we're going to get to scaling, but number one question I get is, how do we do this for all clients? And so I'm going to ask the team about that. But what I'll say about segmentation broadly, because you've probably been through a segmentation exercise and there's A, B, C, D, and gold, platinum, whatever. The reality is they're your best clients, and then there's everybody else. That is the truth. And the ultimate goal, I think, for many advisors is to move to a place where everybody's an A client. There's only a couple of ways to scale a service. It's either you're only offering it for the top clients, right? That group of A's plus everybody else. It gets sort of a slightly lower service experience, or you're offering it to everybody and you need to add more advisors on your team or join a firm with a bigger team and more resources. Those are really, you have one of two choices there. So I could go on a tangent about this, but I won't. The last thing I'll say about ongoing client service is engaging the CPA, using these tools like the tax letter, which I think is brilliant, to engage the CPA, host just an annual conversation, provide the client and a CPA with that summary. Most folks aren't doing that. If you talk to prospects about the fact that you do that, if you post on social media or on your website that you do that, prospects will immediately know that they're not getting that somewhere else. Just go to the next slide for a second, Mark, and then we'll quickly go over to one last thing. Right. So the tax letter is an awesome tool. On the next slide, you're going to see what we talked about just a second ago with, at what points do we talk about tax planning? If you're newer to this space, which most of you are not, I always recommend if you're training a younger advisor or newer advisor, have a list of questions ready to go that are your go-to questions that you review. Maybe it's in your calendar, reminder of the review meeting. You quickly scan them and remember, okay, it might make sense to hit on these things, or I want to remember to get triggered when something comes up and ask one of these questions related to tax planning. The last thing I'll show you in this area is around centers of influence. I think I have it in here. It's hard to tell now that I'm not controlling the slides, but I recommend sending a letter to all COIs. Send a letter just like we did with the clients. If you could advance the slide, Mark, that says, and send them to your clients' CPAs, by the way, and estate attorneys and whomever. Folks, we've had a lot of great success this year with our clients. We've added some new services. Here are the ways in which we're currently helping clients. Here are some screenshots of the tools that we are using with clients. We're going to be providing this to you on an annual basis. If you'd like to learn more about what you're doing, feel free to reach out. If you, have anybody that you think would be interested in something like this, please reach out to us. If you can advance the slide, Mark, I think I can show a copy of that letter. Yeah, so use very specific language, by the way, with centers of influence, because the reason why CPAs don't refer business to advisors is because they don't know what advisors do. They think advisors are buying Tesla and selling it. They don't understand that advisors do this. You have to use this language, because when this comes up in a conversation, when a client is asking a CPA, God, I don't know what to do about my parents' long-term care, and you just sent a letter reminding them of what you do, they're going to make the connection. Okay, I'm on a tangent. Moving on. Next question for you all. Yes. One of the things we talk about a lot is the importance of having the right people on the team and the right processes that you're leveraging. Talk to us a little bit about how workflow is separated. On the next slide, I do have a picture of all of you. 2 advisors on the team, a director of planning, 3 advisors rather, sorry, and then of course our team in ops and investments at the home office level in the back. Can you talk through workflow a bit and how you've managed to perfect that?
Chad, you want to address that, or you want me to start?
I can kick it off, Mark. Sure. Because the one thing that I will say, Penny, as I was thinking as you were just talking, I think every practice has to look at what their resources and capabilities are to be able to execute, because I think the worst thing that we as advisors can do in the initial stages of a relationship is articulate that we provide a certain advice platform or service and then not execute upon it.
Right.
I think you're better off a client not knowing what they don't know than saying you're going to do this and not follow through on it. So having the right team structure in place, I think, is everything with that. So again, we have things pretty well automated, so it doesn't leave it to chance and memories to happen, that there are processes that make sure that that does come through. And it starts on our team with our director of planning, with Melissa Clark, to make sure that every client is being communicated with appropriately, and that the right set and the same data set is being requested for every client, depending on the stage or the station that they're in our client life cycle. So whether they're a prospective client, whether they're a new planning client, whether they're an existing client that we've been working with for years, Melissa controls, and that process starts with her every single time. So it's not a who's on first, who is supposed to be requesting it. The workflows, the processes dictate that, so that it is automated and that we're doing it the same time every time to lead for that consistency.
Great
and
point.
I would add in there that every Monday morning when we run our ops meeting, we look at every open task and every active workflow, so that we make sure we're actually following up. And Angela and Melissa, along with Amanda, are kind of our operations ninjas. and they make sure that those of us who are maybe call me lazy, or maybe I'm more of a strategic thinker, actually execute the tasks that are assigned to us, and don't just stare at them and say, yeah, I'll do that later.
That's a brilliant
Not that
spin,
any
by the way.
advisor might do that.
It's a brilliant spin. You're not lazy. You're just a strategic thinker. I
I'm
love
a strategic thinker. I also
love it.
have ADHD. So barring somebody
can I
kicking
cast
me,
my vote for lazy?
Listen, don't we all? But yeah, no, it's a great point, and I think some people are probably thinking, well, I don't have the team, or I don't have the right team. And my answer to advisors when I was a coach was, again, there are limited options. That's the good thing. There's not unlimited options. There's limited options. You either need to serve less people because you are sort of doing it on your own, or you have an admin and not a planner on your team, or you need to hire that person and invest in the practice. That's it. And so the biggest question, and anybody who's followed my talks over the last couple of years, the biggest question an advisor can ask themselves is, it's not about tax planning or tools or anything. It's, what do I want to build, and what do I want to spend my time doing, period. The answer to that question dictates everything else. So if you're wondering where to start, I would start there. Because you can run an enterprise and build an enterprise and also do all the things you love, but only if all the things you love is building a business. And so, a topic for another day. But on the next slide, I'm going to show you, thank you, Mark. Leverage the systems, integrations, and automations available, folks. I can't tell you how many advisors say to me, this just doesn't work. And I'm like, but did you Google it? Did you use ChatGPT? ChatGPT is an incredible tool, by the way. I do think it's taking away some of our creativity as people, but it is brilliant for this type of stuff. We use WealthBox. The integration between Holistiplan and WealthBox works in a couple ways. You can push out, well, first of all, you can pull in data from WealthBox directly into Holistiplan around the households. You can push out reminders from Holistiplan to WealthBox, and then of course you can push out templated emails around the tax letter, for example, within WealthBox. Also, on the next slide, I believe I put it. If you're, I mean, I would guess most of the CRMs you folks use have this. There are tons of workflows that are standard within typical CRMs. There are also specific workflows that are created in partnership with certain firms like Holistiplan. There are teams like this team right here that has gone ahead and created their own workflows for every stage of the client engagement process, which is incredibly helpful. What I'll say is, workflows work if you use them among your team. It's really that simple. For folks that are much more task-oriented, I would say that start small. Remember, we talked about client onboarding, client reviews, and ongoing service. Client onboarding, client reviews, tax planning. Just create workflows for those three things. And just the couple of things that you want to remember, right? Those things that I bulleted out a couple slides ago. That's it. Just start with that, and remember the A's plus everybody else. Just start with the A's. Once you start to shift behavior, so you see things working in a really simple way with the clients that it's most important to have it work with, you'll be able to integrate it slowly into the rest of your practice. So that's my advice there. Folks, one question for you. How do you, and I don't think I've ever asked you this, but how do you decide which clients get more advanced tax planning? WealthBox is a CRM for the person who just asked. Super easy to use. How do you decide who gets more advanced tax planning versus who gets sort of a basic analysis? Or does everybody get the same experience?
Well, a lot of that just comes down to complexity and need. I'd say, Penny, through the discussion, if you have a client that is a retiree, fixed income, Social Security, pension, right, IRA, taxable, there's still tax planning that happens based on what is their what is their legacy goals. There's a number of different things that can happen, but that there are certain clients that maybe don't require really in depth that we just want to use the system, use the tool as a gut check to make sure that, as Mark said, it's integrated within our financial plan well. And then there's people that have a lot of complexity, a lot of moving parts. Those are the people that are maybe going to have the two specific tax meetings a year, followed up with some more in-depth use of the Holistic Plan tool there. So a lot of times it's needs-based more than it is a specific level of client gets X, Y, or Z.
And then I would add on, we do have obviously levels of client service that are articulated where we're automatically going to do this. But then sometimes you catch somebody who might not necessarily fall into your A or A plus category, and then you see that they get, you talk to them and they're getting 5K1s and they're members of 2 partnerships, and maybe they don't have the income or current set of current amount of net worth that might trigger your classification, but their complexity does. So it's dependent. But generally, all of our A clients are getting tax planning, and those below selectively.
Yes.
Yeah, and I don't want to beat a dead horse on segmentation, but because folks get very hung up on this, like I have seen advisors fail to act because they're so caught up in the CRM's not labeled perfect, the segment isn't perfect, I need to do this in Excel, how am I going to do? And what they end up doing is labeling everybody A, B, or C, and then doing nothing differently for any segment. Remember that at the end of the day, the main differentiator between your top clients, your Bs, your Cs, your everybody else's, is really the frequency of reviews. And sure, the level of work, but really it's the frequency of reviews and the number of times in which you're, meeting with them on certain topics. And so if you're thinking about where to start, just start there. Just start with the frequency of the meetings and don't worry about anything else. Okay. Switching gears slightly, but it's a question that I think a lot of people have around the difference between planning and advice. And I know that was a session just before this, but how is your work with clients leveraging Holistic Plan change the relationship with the client's CPA, if at all? Or what anecdotes can you share about how CPAs have reacted in your experience the last couple of years?
I've been kicking off. You want to go with this one, Mark?
Yeah, I'll start. I think it improves our relationship. Most CPAs are so busy with their compliance work that our experience has been very few do planning, and every client wants it. Every client who's concerned about taxation wants tax planning. And so the ones that we work with, and certainly the ones we prefer to work with, are appreciative of it, especially when we, call them or bring them into a meeting and say, hey, we've been looking at this tax strategy. What do you think? So they very much appreciate it, is my 2 cents.
Yeah, and as I think as advisors, at least in my 21 years of doing this, a big challenge has been to find CPAs consistently that want to or are willing to do the tax planning side of things, not just tax prep. So I think CPAs are very open and receptive because to looking at some of the tax planning that we will do as advisors. I'd love to know how many times in 21 or 22 years I've told a client that that we do tax planning, not advice, and given that disclosure. But taking it that next step to integrate with the CPA, I think saves the CPA time because we can lay the groundwork of saying, hey, you're the expert in this. We're not trying to replace you. We don't have the expertise and the ability to replace you. But here, based on all of our experience and knowledge of this client, which, by the way, probably goes deeper than just the tax side because we're coordinating the estate side, the investment side, as well as incorporating the tax conversation. Here's all of the assumptions that we made based on everything that we know about this client that can, number one, elevate the CPA's knowledge of that client, and then to ultimately give them the final say as the expert on the team for this piece without them having to do all of that heavy lifting. That can lead to not just a good client experience, but also to opening up a potential center of influence for introductions of saying, hey, the other advisors that I've seen with other clients, they're not doing this, because we saw that, Penny, in your previous slides, not everybody is having that conversation.
And I'd be really, and I'm curious, show of hands, I'd be really surprised if you were providing something like the tax letter to CPAs or showing them these tools, and the CPA does not ever refer business or isn't at all impressed by this. I'd be really, really surprised. How many folks are doing that currently? Just if you could like show of hands on the, I'm more curious, how many folks are doing that currently? No hands, so I'm assuming it's a glitch with my computer here. But great opportunity. Oh, it doesn't allow for hands raised. Okay, so there goes that. I would, yeah, I mean, again, I hear all the time from advisors complaints about CPAs. And I think the reality is that, and this is true not just for CPAs, this is true for how prospects and clients view us as well. We use fancy terms like holistic and comprehensive, and all these words don't mean anything to people who aren't in our industry. You got to remember that. Most people still equate financial advisors with stock pickers. And it's a marketing and branding problem, but I also think we haven't done a great job of educating the masses about what we actually help people solve for. And so I highly recommend, as another best practice, sending out that letter to your client CPAs, certainly, as well as any centers of influence in your circle. I do want to get to one question, and then I'm going to ask for a case study from my advisors here. And thank you folks for trying to help me with the Zoom and also commenting on my baby. I just saw the chat box. I wasn't able to see it before, but somebody asked about buying a tax practice as an RIA. This is a really good question. I struggle with this candidly, and I'm curious what Chad and Mark, we have not spoken about this, but I'm curious what you all think. I think if you have a bad experience with the CPA, you jeopardize the relationship. I think it really comes down to that. I'm not as much worried about the other way around. I think that advisors that are as credentialed as our folks that are at Journey, I would not worry about losing a client. I would worry if we had an accounting firm and they had a bad experience. So TBD, but I do think it's where the industry is going. So it's something strategically I'll have to weigh in the coming years. But Mark and Chad, any thoughts on that?
You know me, I always have a thought on everything.
I know.
I've long thought, and I mean 10, 15 years long thought, that the right RIA structure includes estate planning and tax work. And business planning as well for entity structure, design, et cetera. Now, the implications of that are complicated. And I get why we haven't done it as a firm, but if I had my druthers, we'd have all that here because the simpler we can make a client's life, the stickier they are. The problem, as you pointed out, is finding providers, other providers, attorneys and CPAs who deliver at the level of quality at which we deliver.
Yeah, and I think that's a main problem in that space. And yeah, I completely agree. And I do think that it's something, though, that all firms, when we think about our own SWOT analysis, that all firms really need to be thinking about. But if you have a good relationship with a couple of CPAs at Journey, we invite all of our advisors to introduce us to folks that they've had great relationships with so that we can leverage them nationally if possible. Folks, we only have a couple minutes. Chad, I'll let you say.
I was just going to say real quick, if we're doing our jobs as the quarterback on the financial team, the client should feel like it's an integrated service, whether it's integrated.
Great point. That's a
right?
great point.
So it's all in how the relationship is managed, how it's positioned up front, and the amount of time that you put into making sure that you have a relationship and understand who the client's other professionals are. It can be just as seamless, whether it's internal or external.
And a great example of an advisor that looks at not what he doesn't have, but how he can use what he does have to enhance the client experience. Thank you for that. Last thing, I know we just have 2 minutes. One quick anecdote or client success story, and you could stop sharing your screen if you want, Mark. Thank you so much. One quick success story around tax planning, Holistiplan, anything that you folks can think about from the past few years that worked really, really well that included Holistiplan.
I'll give a quick one, and then Martin, give you a little more time to rack your brain, maybe. But I will say I have a client that is a longtime family friend that last year unfortunately went through a very tough transition and lost her spouse of 41 years in there, and in that they had everything from a lot of money in qualified plans to a farm in Oklahoma. She's a resident of the state of Florida. She has a really big annuity that has super low basis that is just a tax time bomb that's a very big concern. So juggling everything from IRMA adjustments to the NIT calculation on the annuity income that's coming in to farm revenue that comes in. Holistiplan has been huge in being able to enable us to have the conversations of how does this impact not only just what my effective bracket is, but what is that leaving us in the future for how do we plan our distributions around all of these certain things together to make sure that it's integrated to the plan. Without having a tool like Holistiplan, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it would have been a whole heck of a lot more different. And from a scalability perspective, I don't know that you can have too many clients like that and actually execute on that deliverable without the tool.
Great point.
And there aren't a whole lot of CPAs that would want to spend the time or figure out how they could bill for the time to do all that modeling. And for us, it's easy, right? It's part of our fee. And then I'll throw in one quick thing because I know we're at time. I have a client who has for the next 4 years going to have at least $1 million a year of long-term cap gain. And what we did was model that out and figure out what we would need to harvest in losses to give them what they would consider a reasonable tax bill. And given their investment strategy, we were able to find a long short portfolio that would likely harvest a level of tax loss to at least make that palatable. And there aren't a lot of advisors that are thinking about things like that, like business sales and cap gains, and how do you recover that? And how do you model that? So just some thought.
That's brilliant. Thank you both, and congrats on all the success you folks have had the last year. Everyone, it was so great being with you. I know we're up on time. Thank you for giving us the space to share with you. Happy to share the slides. You should have my email. And Holistiplan team, thanks so much.